facial recognition technology is here. And if it feels dystopian, that's because it is. This type of technology gives law enforcement an unprecedented power of surveillance. And according to Kade Crockford, it has the potential to supercharge police abuses. Kade is with me now to talk about this new technology and how to make sure that racist institutions can't use it to forward their legacy of surveilling communities of color. Kade, welcome to our program.
Thanks for having me.
You're the director of technology for the Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts, and you have been working to protect and expand First and Fourth Amendment rights and civil liberties in the digital 21st century. And you focus mostly on how systems of surveillance and control impact not just society in general, but the main targets, people of color, Muslims, immigrants, and dissidents. I said before you came on, those are the main people who are watching this show. So can you give just a brief overview of what is going on, especially in this moment in time around surveillance?
Yeah. So what's been happening, unfortunately, for the better part of 2 decades is a massive expansion of government and corporate surveillance, largely behind the scenes and almost entirely without any sort of legislative authorization, either at the state or federal level, without any meaningful public debate before technologies are implemented and used on us, and without any rules or regulations to govern how the government can monitor us. So we've really seen in the post 9/11 period an expansion of the national security state, so-called, down to the state and local level, where state and local police are now frequently using technologies that 25 years ago either didn't exist or were sort of in the realm of science fiction, or were relegated to the military and agencies like the CIA. And facial surveillance is one of those. So here in Massachusetts, for example, and across the country, we have seen for 15 years at least, registries of motor vehicles using facial recognition technology to conduct fraud checks at driver's license departments, at state identification departments. But they haven't only been using the technology to compare. So for example, in Massachusetts, they use the tech. If I go and get a new driver's license, they take a picture of me and then they scan that image against all the other images in the database to see if I'm trying to apply for a license under a fake name. And they arrest people for this frequently. We know, however, that the technology makes mistakes a lot, and it happens to make mistakes more often for specifically Black women, but also people of color generally, women generally, the elderly, as well as younger people, children. So according to a National Institute for Standards and Technology study that was published in December, for example, the technology only really works consistently well for middle-aged white men. Despite that,
just like the country and the economy. How interesting.
Right. So despite that, not only have registries of motor vehicles been using this tech to do fraud checks for a number of years and actually, arresting people as a result of sometimes of mistakes that the technology is making, but they've also been offering their systems up to police and security agencies behind closed doors. So we found out, for example, when we sued the Registry of Motor Vehicles here in Massachusetts last year, that since 2006, the RMV had been performing facial recognition searches for any police or federal law enforcement agency that asked them to, and there's no warrant required. There's no even suspicion of criminal activity that's required. All that the police need to do is take a photograph of someone, whether they got it from a surveillance camera or from Facebook or Twitter, or they just snapped a picture of someone at a protest and email it to a technician at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, who will then scan that image against the database of state IDs and driver's license images and write back, oh yeah, we found someone, this might be your person. This has been happening in secret for 15 years in Massachusetts. It is extremely disturbing. There is no law that governs how this technology can be used or, limits it to serious crimes or provides any kind of judicial oversight. And it's exceedingly dangerous. So we found in Detroit, for example, in recent weeks, we've learned of 2 cases of Black men who have been wrongfully arrested because this technology gets it wrong. I think a really critical thing for people to understand here too about the bias and the inaccuracies in this system, in these systems, is that when even a federal government institution like the National Institute of Standards and Technology evaluates how these systems perform, they're using pristine images like passport quality photos. But that's not how police actually use this technology. Police use the technology by taking a still from a grainy video surveillance camera that's shot at a weird angle. Oftentimes people are wearing hats. And so this stuff is just junk. And nonetheless, it's leading to people in Detroit, particularly Black people, being wrongfully arrested because the police are, oh, the computer told us it's this guy. Yeah, it looks like it's him. He has a criminal record. Let's go pick him up. And that's exactly what they're doing. So what we're seeing
if you didn't want to wear a mask before, now is a great time to start.
Exactly. So we're seeing that this technology is supercharging racist abuse against Black and brown people. And the potential for danger down the road is significant. I mean, we're talking about a technology that enables the government, when it's using these systems in concert with video surveillance networks that they have basically in every metropolitan area in the country now, cameras like basically on every block. We're talking about a system that enables the automated cataloging and tracking of every single person's every public movement, habit, and association forever. And this can be done on an automated basis, just with the push of a button. So, would you like to find out where a politician was last week who may be, saying things about the police that you don't like? Sure, just enter their name into this database and you'll see, oh, were they seen outside a strip club, a cannabis shop, outside an abortion clinic with a woman who wasn't their wife? I mean, the potential for political blackmail, for personal abuse, and certainly for the supercharging of things like the drug war and other racist practices that the police have been engaged in, it's just dystopian.
This is very frightening. I have people in our stream chat who are shuddering. They're saying they're literally shuddering at this moment. Can you talk about the legacy of surveilling Black and Indigenous people that facial recognition technology is continuing?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of really critical, I just want to say, this work, we've passed now 11 or 12 actually, municipal prohibitions on government use of this technology at the local level, at the city and town level throughout the country, 7 in Massachusetts and 5 in California. San Francisco and Boston are the 2 largest cities to have done this. San Francisco first last year and Boston just a few weeks ago. And I want to be clear that we would not be anywhere in this movement without the leadership and the vision of Black radical scholars and activists. And one of those people is Simone Brown, who wrote an incredible book about the surveillance of Blackness. And in her book, she talks about something called the Lantern Laws, which were 18th century laws in New York City that required that any free Black person walking around after dark had to carry a lantern to illuminate their face so that they could be seen by white people. There's other history here too as well. Christian Parenti, in a book that he published about 10 years ago about the history of surveillance in the United States, shows that biometrics themselves, so biometric just means something that's unique to an individual person. So our faces are biometrics, our ears are biometrics, our voices are biometrics, and the government is obsessed with collecting these so that they can track us and catalog us and spy on us.
Yes, when I had a baby, they wouldn't let me out of the hospital unless I gave them a sample of her blood to put in the state database.
Oh, hell no. Where was that?
Yeah, they wouldn't let me in New York. They wouldn't let me out. I tried to get out of it. I tried to falsify. I just tried.
Wow,
I tried. They won't let you out. And then they threaten you with taking away your kid if you won't do it.
That's quite terrifying. So Christian Parenti.
He's a lawyer, Kade. You know anyone?
Yeah, I do actually. We should talk after this. But
okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Christian Parenti found that even the history of biometric surveillance, has roots to some degree in slavery. One of the first forms of biometric identification in this country was the slave pass. Slavers found that when they wrote, Johnny can go to the next town to pick up some, gin or whatever and bring it back to my plantation, that slaves, in their ingenuity, always resisting and refusing the inhuman demands placed upon them, would pass that pass around and give it to their friends and say, hey, I got this pass. You can like go to the next town and see your wife, or whatever. And so slavers realized this and started writing on the passes, Johnny, 5'6", he has a dent in the side of his head on the right, he's got a limp, etc. These were crude biometrics that were developed in response to resistance on the part of slaves to the types of surveillance and control that white slavers were subjecting them to. So yes, there's a long history in this country, really dating all the way back to slavery through the Civil War and the Reconstruction period and the Jim Crow period of white power, white elites using surveillance technologies, often in response, as I said, to resistance from Black people to those systems of domination. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. I mean, we still see it today with the FBI, designating Black Lives Matter a Black identity extremist movement so that they can marshal the powers and the money given to them to fight the war on terrorism, to fight Black radical dissent in the United States. So that, tradition unfortunately continues until today.
Can we talk a little about the overlap between the state and corporations using these technologies? I read in your piece recently that IBM, Amazon, and Microsoft said they're going to pause or end sale of their facial recognition technology to police in the U.S. I don't know.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem quite right. I mean, it seems like, come on, like another capitulation that's not useful to, Black Lives Matter. There's just a propaganda.
Well, so I do think that it was a PR move,
right.
But it has some value. So what you're referring to is IBM first coming out a few weeks ago and saying, you know what, we're going to get out of the face recognition business entirely. We're not going to do any more research and development. We're not going to sell any products. That was a great move from the company, by the way, who still has not apologized for its role in the Nazi genocide. Second,
well, that's because the Jews aren't in the street right now, and they don't need the Jews to buy their computers. So,
right.
So sorry, I'm going to get in trouble for that one. Go ahead.
First, IBM does that. Second, Amazon comes out and says, okay, you know what? We've been facing pressure for a while now to stop selling our face surveillance technology to police. We're going to do that. We're going to place a 1-year moratorium on our sales to police. And then Microsoft, for its part, says shortly after, all right, we're not going to sell to police departments until there's a federal law governing these technologies. So I have two things to say about that. The first is that these companies coming out with these statements is an admission on their part that their technologies are a threat to Black people's lives and safety, period, full stop. They are acknowledging what we have been saying for years in the racial justice community, in the civil rights community, that these technologies are particularly pernicious and dangerous to Black and brown people in this country. Those companies choosing the George Floyd nationwide movement around racial justice, choosing that moment to come out and say, okay, we're going to distance ourselves from the police. We're going to distance this technology that we sell from the police, is an admission on their part that we were right and that the technology is a threat to Black and brown people's lives. So that's huge. That actually is significant. The second thing, though, is where I totally agree with you, that we are simultaneously seeing these companies say nice things in public and then too often turn around and behind closed doors lobby state and federal lawmakers to pass the most permissive guidelines that would enable their technologies to be used by every police department in the country, by the FBI, by the DEA, by the CEA, you name it. Every 3-letter agency and every cop and sheriff in the country, they want using these technologies. And they support, especially Microsoft, supports legislation, for example, as they did in Washington State, that allows extremely broad and permissive authority for police to use this technology to track us everywhere we go. So we're, happy that they've acknowledged that we're right, that these technologies threaten all people, but especially Black people in the hands of the police. But we are also not stupid, and we are not going to give up the fight. And we are going to be prepared in Congress and in every state capital across this country for their lobbyists to try to sneak some really, really dangerous legislation through that authorizes very permissive and broad use of this technology. And we're going to fight it.
How are we doing in New York around this issue? I mean, the NYPD is probably, is probably not real happy. I know even back to, in Occupy, they just said, oh, look, an occupation of a park by hippies. We're going to put up a big police tower with guns. It seems like we're losing here.
Well, New York is a difficult case. I mean, the NYPD, as you probably know, has unmatched political power with respect to, by comparison to other municipal police departments throughout the country. It's basically an army. And it's clear that politicians in New York are terrified of the NYPD, and they're terrified of the union, and they're terrified of doing anything that the union wouldn't like and that cops would make a fuss about. That said,
why does union busting never happen to the NYPD union? It's all over the other unions. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah.
Different question.
So that said, there has been some progress in New York. So among other things, there is a state bill that would prohibit, I believe, the use of face surveillance technologies in public schools, which is hugely significant, and that ought to pass. But at the city level, there's also
I'm still just in shock that they're actually doing that.
Yeah,
this is absolutely disgusting.
Yes. Yeah, there's a school district in New York, in Lockport, New York, that adopted a $1.5 million or something facial surveillance system that enables the tracking of students and staff and visitors to the school as they.
Did they put that in under the guise of, we're going to stop a school shooting if it happens here? They use that.
You got it. Yeah, which is just patently ridiculous. What is the camera going to jump off the wall and strangle the guy? I mean, it's
come on.
So that's happening in New York. Also, though, in New York City, finally, activists, after working for years and years and years, were able to secure the Post Act, which is a really crucial measure that basically subjects NYPD surveillance technologies and practices, as well as surveillance technologies and practices of other city departments in New York, to basic transparency requirements. So, the NYPD for years has tried to act like the CIA when, agencies, nonprofits, lawyers, et cetera, ask for documents, information about their surveillance programs. They've actually used what's called the GLOMAR response, which is something that was invented in the national security context at the federal level, which says we can neither confirm nor deny that these records exist. So not only are they saying, we're not going to give you this information, they're pulling some James Bond type of stuff and saying, we can't even confirm or deny whether these records exist. So that's the context in which this critical police reform measure, this transparency measure, the Post Act, was passed in New York. So that will at least require, as far as I understand it, that the police department and other city agencies have to be public about what types of technologies they're using and what types of policies are governing those technologies. So that at least will open up some space that activists can use to, agitate against programs like facial recognition in the city of New York.
We're speaking with Kade Crockford. She is the Director of Technology for Liberty program at the ACLU of Massachusetts. Kade, thanks for joining us today. What can our viewers do to support the ACLU in their work of stopping the use of facial technology?
Well, if you live in Massachusetts, you can call the House Chair of the Judiciary Committee right now before Monday, because the state legislature is considering a police reform bill, and we're trying to get a facial recognition ban in that package. If you live anywhere else in the country, you can reach out to your ACLU affiliate or to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is also waging a nationwide campaign on this, or to Fight for the Future, a digital rights organization, which is one of our partners and is also engaged in this work, to find out how you can get involved in passing a municipal ban on the government's use of the technology at the local level. It's crucial to remember that, the FBI is powerful, the CIA is powerful, but they're not the ones that have their fingers in every community in this country. That's local police. Mm-hmm. And so if you can ban your local police department from using this technology, not only do you contribute to the nationwide movement and help us build power that eventually we hope will reach DC, but you can really make a meaningful difference in your own community, because it's really the local cops that are going to be doing this to you first and last.
Kade Crockford, thanks for joining us. We had one question come in right at the end here, and I'm wondering if you would take a brief minute to just answer this. The question is about how can people protect themselves? Would it make any difference to remove pictures of yourself from your social media after they've been there for years? What in general can people do to protect themselves from facial recognition technology?
So unfortunately, companies like Clearview AI, which is this extremely shady firm that was started by a guy who has ties allegedly to the alt-right, which is frightening, has already scraped images from every social media service in the world and put them in its facial recognition database that it makes it available to police. So you could stop posting new images of yourself to social media, but unfortunately, companies like Clearview have already basically stolen them or downloaded them onto their servers.
So it was a good idea for me not to put my kids' photos on Facebook.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Don't put kids' pictures on Facebook.
Thank you. Where's my husband? He better be watching.
No, it's very important. Yeah. Especially because they can't consent. They're kids. You can make a bad decision for yourself, but don't do it for your child.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can do is to stop posting them going forward. But look, I mean, what we really need here are systemic law reform outcomes that can protect everyone. So it's not going to be enough.
Get involved in the fight. Yeah,
exactly. Get involved in the fight.
Kade, thank you so much for joining us again. We're speaking today with Kade Crockford, Director of Technology for Liberty Programs at the ACLU of Massachusetts. You can follow the work at on Twitter at OneKade, ONE, spelled out KADE. Thanks again for joining us. It has been a pleasure and a terrifying pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Okay. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. We bring you interviews like this 4, 5, sometimes 8 times a week, along with our progressive news headlines and other progressive commentary from folks at ACT.tv. Thanks for watching.